Okay, let's call the meeting to order. And first order of business, the adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions? I hear no additions and I hear no deletions, so could somebody make a motion? Can. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. The council meeting minutes of August the 5th. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we could use a motion. Dory? Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. And our first appointment this morning is with Melody Garner-Skiba from the Sugar Beet Growers. So the floor is yours. Would you like water or coffee or you're good? Okay.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Re-designate members of council, for giving us some time on your agenda today. I do apologize. Our president was hoping to be here, but he is combining, and apparently farming takes precedent at this time of year than meetings per se. So today I wanted to come back and revisit a conversation we had last year, maybe about 18 months ago, when our organization came and presented to you. Oh, sorry, thank you. When our organization came and presented to you and said we would be coming back to ask for some support. Well, the clock has rang, and that is what I'm here to do today, is to ask for your support. So I want to walk you through, and many of you are quite familiar already with the sugar beet industry, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here giving you the background on where we're at, but more about where we're going and why we're here today to ask for your support. Is we've got a pretty big, ambitious destination in mind of where we're headed, and we've got a roadmap that we're going to follow to get there, and the goal really over the next, I'm going to say 3 to 4 months, is getting all of the passengers on the bus as we go on this journey. So where we're at, as you all know, is we're the sole source of 100% Canadian sugar in Canada. There's no other place, right? We supply a maximum of 10% of the domestic market. The rest of the sugar that is used by Canadians is raw cane that's imported. The value of that is over $635 million. That value is largely attributed to refiners, but more importantly to farmers in Guatemala, Vietnam, Brazil, and other third world countries. It is not attributed to Canadian farmers here in Canada. That's a challenge for us, I think, and that's a challenge that we would like to tackle here on this journey. Now, as we look to always focusing on what we can do more as an industry, we're seeing little blips of hope that come along. The new CUSMA agreement gave us an access of an additional 10,000 tons of sugar, so we now can export 20,000 tons of beet sugar. That's a pretty high value component of it, of the industry, so that's really, really neat. Something that's new that's come to light is when we were here 18 months ago, I told you all that we had to get some ducks in a row. Well, one of the ducks in the row that we had to get was we had to figure out what our economic contribution was to the overall industry and as well as to the country. So we actually completed an economic assessment here last year, and the numbers, while they may not seem big comparatively, when you base them on the fact that we only grow 28,000 acres of crop here, they're pretty significant. So we employ over 2,000 jobs here in southern Alberta. That includes the spin-offs and everything like that. Our GDP contribution is over $248 million. So that's over $8,000 an acre of GDP contribution. So as we always like to say, we're a small but mighty crop. We punch well above our weight. And we feel because of that that we can do more. The other duck we had to get in a row was that we had to start communicating and figuring out our agronomic practices, our labor practices, and our environmental standards. Many of you have farming in your background, if you're not still farming. You understand we treat our people right, we do what we can for the planet and our soil, and that we take care of things because we depend on our people and our land to bring our crops to fruition. So what we actually undertook was a sustainability verification through the Farm Sustainability Assessment. And the long story short is we were able to achieve silver verification status. So our crop has been verified sustainable by a third party that's a global player in the marketplace. Companies like Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Kellogg's are all part of this program. And we can now say with confidence we can supply them with verified sustainable sugar. So where we're at is we grow a great crop with good sugar, we do it in an ethical and sustainable manner, and we contribute greatly to the GDP and to the employment sector here in southern Alberta. So fantastic news, but can we do more? And that's really what we want to focus on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Larry, there's somebody. You.
Don't, it's all good.
Yeah.
Throwing me for a loop, I like it. So the destination that we have in mind, and for some of you that have been around this industry for quite some time, this isn't going to come as a shock to you. Our destination is simple. We want a domestic sugar policy. We are one of the only nations that does not have a domestic sugar policy. And the reason why we feel that there is opportunity for us to ask for this now from our federal government is a multitude of factors. So the first one is, of course, the COVID-19. We are emerging post-pandemic. Well, I wouldn't even say we're post-pandemic right now. We're still in the pandemic right now. And we have heard from our federal government that agriculture needs to step up to the plate as we start to move out of the pandemic and increase our economic, as we return to, I guess, normal times, I'm going to say. So during the pandemic, what we found was more and more Canadians were starting to question about where their food came from. Not only where their food is coming from, how it's being produced, because there was a lot of worry about supply chain disruptions. We saw sugar flying off the shelves because people were cooking at home more, baking at home more, and we also saw some hoarding, right? The stories of Costco and all of them where they're coming out with trailer loads full of staple products. So coming out of the COVID-19 and the pandemic, we look at it and say, okay, we have an opportunity as an industry, as the sugar beet industry, to do more. We can increase our food security for our Canadians of a staple product. No matter where you stand on sugar, whether you like it, whether you think it's evil, it is a staple of food production, right? It's used for a multitude of things. So we have to have sugar. This industry especially helps our rural and economic development through the jobs and the GDP contributions. Through our sustainability verification, we saw that we can reduce our impact on climate change. Farmers in southern Alberta do a lot better job around environmental standards than farmers in Guatemala, Vietnam, and Brazil. That's just a fact. We now have the paper to prove that. We have heard provincially we need to get off the oil and gas roller coaster. Agriculture needs to play a major part in that, and I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that. The sugar beet industry is ready to do their part. And lastly, and probably one of the biggest passions I have is competitiveness for farmers. Our farmers right now are unfairly competing against highly subsidized sugar producers in Brazil, Guatemala, Vietnam, and other countries. It puts them at an economic disadvantage. We're not playing on the same field. I don't even think we're in the same ball diamond at this point, and I don't think that's right. How can we fix that? It's quite simple. It's for us to put together a domestic sugar policy. So we actually worked over the past 18 months as we were getting our ducks in a row, as I told you, and we did our economic assessment, we did our verification. We also actually worked with a company called Sericon Consulting, who are agriculture specialists, and they actually drafted a white paper together for us around what a domestic sugar policy could look like, what were some of the challenges of it, and where we could head with a domestic sugar policy. And I want to be crystal clear on this. We're not asking for subsidies. We're not asking for money. We are asking for a two-pronged approach that will help ensure our farmers can be competitive. Number one, we need to manage our exports. So for a prime example is the CUSMA agreement, where we were able to secure that additional 10,000 tons of sugar. It had to be beet sugar. Every free trade agreement, in our opinion, should prioritize beet sugar over the cane sugar that is refined here in Canada, because it's not a Canadian product. The beet sugar is. That's not the case federally. Federally, the CUSMA agreement is the only agreement that actually prioritizes beet sugar. So we need to fix that. And that's a federal issue. It's not your issue. But again, if we can have support from our local municipalities when we have those conversations in Ottawa, it goes a long way. The second prong approach of a domestic sugar policy is really on managing the raw cane that is imported here into Canada. And again, we're not asking for a subsidy on this. What we're asking is for a TRQ, so a tariff rate quota allocation, where we can import a restricted amount of raw cane sugar for process, which would then spur investment and additional production of beet sugar. So we're not trying to cripple our refiners. Our refiners have been with us for a long haul. They've invested in infrastructure, and they're very important to the industry. What we're asking for is for a slow and gradual approach to increasing the production of beet sugar here in Canada. And Sarah Kahn actually looked at 3 different ways of which we could do that, and this is the one that makes the most sense. We're not asking for a tariff on raw cane. We're not asking for that. We're also not asking for complete, as I call it, world domination. We're asking for 20% market share, the ability to get to 20% market share. That's all. Now, some people will express concern that that is going to drive sugar prices up. That is not the case. We are already competing globally with raw cane prices. We have to do that every year, and we negotiate that with our contract. So the concern that consumers' food prices will go up, that is not going to happen. I can't be any more clear than that, because we're already competing with those same customers. So the second part of managing the imports is a large portion of sugar-containing products, so things like your hot chocolate mixes, right? Things, your bakeries, any kind of product that is exported that uses sugar is largely using cane sugar that's been refined. It's not using beet sugar. We would like to see a gradual increase of beet sugar used in those products as well. And that is almost phase 2, I would say, of a domestic sugar policy. The real crux of what we're looking for out of the gate is a sugar policy that prioritizes beet sugar in exports, and it restricts the number of tons of raw cane that can be used. So that is really what we're after here in the interim. And that, we believe, will fund and encourage investment in additional plants, not just in Alberta. We've got the Ontario growers that grow sugar beets and are exporting them to Michigan. They've always had an appetite to put together a plant, but they can't because the refiners are bringing in the raw cane. It's just not an option for them. So this does have the ability to be a truly federal program and offer access to a staple product for all Canadians. So because of that, what we are doing is we understand that this domestic sugar policy, this isn't a short journey. This is a 2 to 3 year journey. This isn't something that with a stroke of a pen, we can be mandating this within a year. This is gonna take us 2 to 3 years. So our game plan, and really the reason why I'm here today, is to ask for your support. Our goal at this point is to get levels or letters of support and indicators of support from all of our municipalities where sugar beets are grown currently, that we can take to our province, to our provincial ag minister and our trade minister, and then they can help us advocate to the federal government about why this needs to be done. So we have secured a letter of support from the MD of Taber. I'm presenting to County of 40 Mile next week. So our hope is that by getting letters of support from our municipalities, getting our province on board, the public on board, our growers are already on board, our senators are on board in our meetings that we've had with them, that we can send a strong message to Ottawa that it's time to quit ignoring Canadian sugar beet farmers. It's time to prioritize Canadian goods and to give Canadians access to a quality product that's produced in a sustainable and ethical manner. So that is what I'm asking for you today, is I'm asking for you as council to consider giving us a letter of support that we can take in this journey as we move to the provincial and the federal level to ask for a domestic sugar policy. Thank you for taking time to listen to us today. And I'd enter, if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to do my best to answer them.
Well, thanks, Melody. One question that pops into my mind, to get to the 20% level, what acreage would you need to have?
So we currently grow 28,000 acres, we'd need to double that acres. Because we're supplying between 8 to 10% right now, Re-Picky. So if we could get to that 20%, just in Alberta, okay, that's without the Ontario growers, we would need to look at probably closer to that 45 to 50,000 acres.
Klaus?
Yeah, thank you. Good presentation that you had there, and I'm happy that you guys have a little bit more luck with the customer, that you have some security there than the dairy industry, because we only lost, and you can imagine a dairy farmer. But yeah, I think it's really important that we as a municipality support the sugar beet growers here, and I think it's a no-brainer for us to be able to do that. And I hope that you know, with all the hard work that you guys are doing, that you are going to get it done, and that's why all the support that is necessary. In Ontario, that was another question you had. How many acres of sugar beets do they grow there?
10,000 acres, and they're all shipped as raw product across the line to Michigan.
Is 10,000 acres, is that enough to have a sustainable plant?
They would like to actually expand. So they're in the same predicament we are, where they are limited in the amount of acres they grow because of factory capacity. So there is an impetus from them. In fact, that group looked several years ago about building, it was more of an ethanol plant, and there was huge appetite from the growers. They just couldn't get the legs underneath of it because of our clean fuel standards and a bunch of the other policy that just was not, I guess, opportunistic enough for them to be able to get that on the ground.
Thank you.
Morris?
Yeah, thank you. You know, to go up to 50,000 acres in here in southern Alberta might be a tough thing to see, because we got so much other, and we only got so much irrigation, but there would be a real good possibility for Ontario to start a new plant maybe. I think that's what we should be focusing on, because it's absolutely ridiculous that we only produce 10% of our own domestic sugar, and all things we export into the U.S., and of course, that is a good market for us, and the thing is, we should be, I'm glad to hear what the board is focused on.
And I think if I can just reply to that, Morris, 50,000 acres may seem like a stretch for sure. And I think if we didn't have the irrigation expansion that was planned for, but we have a waiting list in our office of beet growers, or of new beet growers, as well as existing beet growers. And we're seeing a real appetite for expansion further east. So that Burdetteau Island area and further east, there is a lot of appetite as the irrigation districts expand. Because I agree with you, Morris, without irrigation expansion, it's gonna be really tough. I think that's again another duck that I think will help us get there.
And the plant would have to be quite an increase to that, so that's something else to
Mm-hmm.
Tori?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Morris just said. So with the current infrastructure that is in place, where do you see your ability to increase right now, I guess, without adding new processors, new facilities, and things like that?
Great question, Tori. So actually, we just had a meeting not that long ago with our processor, and there was indication that with some tweaks to that plant, they could be running at 7,000 tons a day. On a good day right now, we're running at 5,000 tons a day. So there is some incremental capacity right there. I will say too, we are, as a board and an organization, we are actually doing some testing this fall on some new extraction methodology. So not following the traditional process. And if this new extraction methodology works, it could significantly reduce the cost of potentially a new plant.
And to go along with that, when you're talking about having passengers, having support for this, where are the processors? Where are the refiners on this? Because I mean, it's got to be a double-edged sword in that way. So, are they supportive of this, or how do we all work together to promote that and to do that?
Great question, and I will be quite candid with you. Because our processor is also a cane refinery, there is not great appetite from them to do this. As you know, the sugar market operates in duopoly here in Canada. There's basically two refiners. Redpath out east, which is completely all raw cane, and then Lantic here and Rogers in the west, which is cane and beet. So outwardly, you know, it would be difficult for them to come out and support a policy like this because they've got their Vancouver plant running at raw cane. That being said, from a business perspective, if I put my business hat on it and I say, okay, wait a second, I am the only beet sugar supplier in Canada, and I now have the ability to increase my market share by 10%, I'd be looking at that. So it's one of those things that we do expect some opposition, absolutely.
So just one other question, Melody. You said the 10,000 acres that are going to Ontario is all exported to Michigan to be processed. Does it come back to Canada or does it stay there?
It stays there and is labeled as US sugar. And in all fairness, for the most part, the price is better in the States because, let me tell you, if I could dream of the perfect domestic sugar policy, it would be what the US has. That would be the dream policy that we could have. The farmers are very well taken care of and very well protected.
So, well, should have said that was the last question. Do they still grow sugar beets at Billings and then down through there?
Yes.
And where do they process those beets?
So there's a plant in Sydney, Montana, and then I'm trying to think Boise, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to think. Morris, you would probably know this better than I because you toured through there.
Yeah, not Boise, maybe at Napa, the Napa plant.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
It's pretty size and
Mhm.
balls they got planted.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Klaus?
Yeah, the plant in Michigan that they have there and our Canadian sugar is processed there, it's kind of an unfair situation that it's sold as Canadian, I mean as American sugar, because you know it is grown here, and doesn't that mean anything? And the other question is, how supportive is our federal government with supporting you guys now with trying to ask for more percentage state into Canada and more processing?
Great questions. So, in regards to the sugar beets going across the line to Michigan, those farmers have bought into the cooperative down there. So the refiner is owned by the farmers, and so, like I said earlier, they get a pretty good price. They get a better price for their product than we do. So for them to bring that back into Canada and sell it into the Canadian market, they would actually be taking a lower price because the Canadian market is priced a lot lower than the American market. So while it may seem unfair, I don't think they would be racing to remove their sugar beets from the Michigan factory just because of what they get from it, right? They want to look at expansion of acres though, for sure. And your second question, in regards to the federal government. So we've had some initial conversations because again, our plan for this is we want to be able to go to the federal government and say, look, we have the support of our municipalities, our province, our farmers. This needs to be done. That being said, I've met with pretty much all of our federal MPs down here. And of course, we're in an election right now. We don't know what's going to happen. But I will tell you, I have commitment from one of our MPs, as well as the others, to support a private members bill going forth on this. So we do know that private members bills can be problematic in the sense that they don't always see headway or get through the process. But we do have support from our MPs here in the region to take it forward and make it a priority. As well as we have had support from the ag critic, Leanne Rude. She was down, was supportive of this. So once the election is over and we've got this, I'm going to say, groundswell of support, that is then when we will go more to whoever is going to be the ag minister, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, because we all know the tremendous amount of agriculture subsidy that they get in the States. It's billions of dollars, and you know it's really hard to compete with that here. Well, you know, you guys are getting no support, no subsidy. You probably don't want it either.
We don't.
Because you probably want to run this thing on your own, and that is a healthy way to do it. And you know, with that, so I think that that's a great way to bring that to the government. That, you know, we don't need your money.
Yeah.
All we need is more business and more sugar staying in Canada. Yeah.
We just need a policy that puts us on a level playing field. That's all we're asking for.
Any other questions? Well, again, thanks very much, and do we have a discussion, or is anyone wanting to make a motion? Any further discussing points? Cory?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be willing to move that letter of support be drafted under the Reeves signature, supporting this initiative for the Alberta Sugar Beet Growers Association.
Any discussion on that motion? Morse? Any discussion on the motion?
Nope.
Oh.
I thought you asked if
No, not yet.
in favor.
I will right now. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Good presentation.
And we're going to leave you a little bit for your coffee here. We thought we'd bring you some Alberta sugar so you can make sure that you're using Alberta sugar in that coffee of yours. Thanks. Have a great day.
Are we ready?
Candace is just gonna get a sign-in sheet for those people who are here for the public hearing.
Okay. Well, we can enter a motion to go into public hearing anyway.
Mr. Chairman, can we do them both separately? There's two of them.
Yeah, because they're very different, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Klaus? This would be to open a public hearing for bylaw 21-1-015. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On here. So this first public hearing that we're having today is for bylaw 21-015, and it is to redesignate portions of Lot 1, Block 1, Plan 0411743, and Lot 2, Block 1, Plan 11150. Both those parcels would be from rural agriculture to business light industrial. This application has been made to increase the size of the existing business light industrial area, which is currently the area that is owned by Optimum Feeds Limited. They want to expand this area so they can accommodate some further light industrial development in this area for a bin manufacturing facility and the infrastructure that they need in order to support that. The proposed application does comply with the policies of the counties and the town of Nobleford's intermunicipal development plan. This area has been identified in that plan as an area for rural commercial or light industrial. And the proposed application does meet also the policies of the county's municipal development plan, section 6.4, in that the lands are poor quality agricultural lands and have been used historically for commercial light industrial purposes. There's an existing precision cabinetry building that's on the property. I think has a couple of different users in it now, but it's been there for quite some time and used for kind of that commercial light industrial development. There's an existing infrastructure in place to support the future development, so they have the existing utilities in place to support what they want to do. The business that they're proposing, the manufacturing, is a low water user. They're not going to need a lot of water to support their industry. The lands are adjacent to Highway 519, so they have good highway access to support the shipping of their materials in and out of the property. In addition, there is a caveat on this title here from when they originally subdivided it out about a year ago, that if further subdivision happened, I think Alberta Transportation has the option to put in to request a service road be put in there, so that the access would be taken off the range road versus the that direct highway access. And the lands are proposed for the proposed use is agriculturally related and would be non-labor intensive, which meets kind of those core criteria that we've historically had in our municipal development plan. After first reading of the bylaw, the applicant did submit a revised area for the rezoning, which adds about 0.278 hectares or about 0.7 acres to the business light industrial area. This amendment was requested to ensure that the dugout or holding pond area that they had constructed is totally contained within the area that they want to rezone and then for future subdivision. And I have included that revised plan in your agenda package. It's on page 5. And it just shows in the southwest corner that they want to bump out that rezoning and subdivision area just to ensure that the pond that they've already constructed is contained within there and that they're not going to have any future issues with regards to easements or anything on the other titles, future titles. This application has been circulated to all the county departments, external agencies, and the town of Nobleford for review and comment. No concerns were expressed with regards to the proposed bylaw. I've included all the comments in the agenda package for your consideration. This application was also sent to the affected landowners and advertised in the August 10th and 17th editions of the Sunny South News, and no comments or concerns were received as a result of that circulation. So with that, I would, the recommendation I put forward is that bylaw 21-015 be read a second time as amended to include that amendment to the map, and that it also be read a third time. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Hillary? Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the letter from, I guess, the landowner or the applicant, it mentions the dugout being an LNID fed for water. Is it also going to be used as a storm pond for the property?
I don't believe that it is actually going to be used as a storm pond. When they submitted their plans for the where the new building's going to go, which is in the eastern part of the parcel, the drainage wouldn't go towards that particular pond. It actually goes more to the south. So they'll have to do a stormwater management plan to address their drainage on the site. And they might have to do some modifications to if they want to have it going towards that dugout that they've put in. But as far as I know, so today when they did it, it wasn't intended for stormwater management necessarily.
Steve?
So just to follow up then, so if they have to do a stormwater management plan, likely the water won't be leaving their property then? Because if they're going to have to build it up because it is already lower, it won't end up into that other property to the south then? So
there's two options that they would have with regards to the stormwater management plan is that they'd either have to create a pond on site to contain their, the water, like the pre-development flows would stay on site, or that they could talk to the adjacent landowners to determine if they're okay with the excess water going onto their properties and having an easement on title with the neighbors. But those would have to be figured out at the time of the development permit. But we're aware of those two things. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition to the bylaw? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition to the bylaw? And last call, is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition to the bylaw? Seeing none, is there anyone in present who wishes to speak in favor of the bylaw? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in favor of the bylaw? And last call, Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in favor of the bylaw? Hearing none, does council have any last questions? Hillary, do you have any closing comments?
Nope, I've covered everything, Mr. Chairman.
Hearing nobody wishing to speak in favor or opposition, we can close this public hearing. Tori? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we could do second reading, if you wish, as amended. Claus?
I'll move that bylaw 21-015 be read a second time as amended.
Any discussion on that? Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. And third? Kent? Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Thank you. Let's move down to bylaw 21-016, and we need a motion to open the public hearing. Claus? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Hillary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Council. So this bylaw application, bylaw 21-016 is to redesignate a parcel within the Northwest 1921 West of the 4th from rural urban Lethbridge Urban Fringe to rural general industrial. And it is known as the parcel where the Green Prairie hay plant is on. And it is north of Highway 3 and east of the Sunnyside Road. Lethbridge County, so the application has made it, put in an application to redesignate the lands from Lethbridge Urban Fringe to rural general industrial. The intent of the application is to bring the subject parcel into compliance with the county's land use bylaw so that they can replace some structures, the structures that were on the property that were lost in the fire. That was in the beginning of July. And to also potentially expand in the future if they so chose. The proposed application meets the policies of the Municipal Development Plan and the Commercial Industrial Land Use Strategy for Industrial Development. The lands, in that the lands are solely used for the existing business, and it is the best use of the property at this time. Green Prairie has been on that site since 1994. It was approved under an old land use bylaw. That's why the zoning wasn't changed at that point in time. The lands have an excellent access to the highway network. There's no new infrastructure required to rebuild or expand their existing business. And the existing and proposed uses are agriculturally related and meet the terms of the Municipal Development Plan. The applicant will also have to apply for development permits going forward to ensure that any future development would include a stormwater management plan and detailed site plans moving forward. That's one thing that came up, I guess, as a result of, unfortunately for the fire, is that those things need to be addressed going forward, and they are more than willing to do that. They've already done some work, positive work in that regard. The applications were circulated to all the county departments and external agencies for review and comment. No concerns were expressed with regards to the proposed bylaw from those circulations, and they are included in your agenda package. This application was also sent to the affected landowners, so a lot of the surrounding acreages in the area, and advertised in the August 10th and 17th editions of the Sunny South News. I did receive one phone call from an acreage owner just with some current issues they have with the plant, some dust and that is emanating from the plant from their existing operation. And I think do believe they are here today if they wish to speak to council about that. With regards to administration's recommendation, our recommendation is that bylaw 21-016 be read a second and a third time. The reason for the recommendation is the proposed redesignation will bring the property into compliance with the county's land use bylaw, and it will allow for future development of the parcel to commence. for an existing use that has been there since 1994. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Hillary. Does council have any questions? Dory?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hillary, could you just clarify, you mentioned a couple times bring into compliance. So does that suggest that it previously was not in compliance then, or could you clarify that for me?
Yes, absolutely. So in the land use bylaw, when it was originally approved in 1994, the land use bylaw allowed for isolated industrial developments within the urban fringe districts. In 2013, when the bylaw was revamped and redone completely, that particular use was taken out of the the urban fringe districts. So meaning that this was a grandfathered use. So they had permission, they were in compliance with an old bylaw, but with the new bylaw, if they ever wanted to rebuild or if they ever wanted to put in a new facility, they wouldn't be able to do that because that use is no longer contained within that district. So that's how they're not in compliance with the existing bylaw. At that time in 2013, it was thought that any type of industrial use should be zoned industrial. So in discussions with Green Prairie over the years, not just since their fire, I have told them that they would need to rezone to rural general industrial if they ever needed to expand to their facility or construct any new structures. So that's how it works when you take a use out of the land use bylaw. They kind of are grandfathered in, but they're kind of in a static mode. They aren't allowed to do anything else until they would be able to rezone. So that's kind of where we stand today.
So just to follow on that, they could continue as is,
That's
but
correct.
they couldn't add anything new.
That's correct.
Okay. Is there any other questions? So Hillary, the letter from the SMRD, would that be something you would take into consideration at the time you would give them a development permit?
Yes, that's correct. I did talk to Jan Tominga at the SMRID about their concerns with regards to specifically their stormwater management plan. That's something that when they do submit their development permits for any new structures, that we would require that full stormwater management plan be completed, and then we would circulate it to the SMRID to ensure that they're being covered with regards to any drainage into the canal.
Thank you. Any other questions? Now I will ask if there's anyone in attendance today who wishes to speak in opposition to the bylaw. And if you do wish to speak, could you please give your name so we can record it? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition to the bylaw? Yes?
I would just like
Come up to the front, please.
I'd just like a little bit of clarification, I guess. I'm not against
No, have a seat.
expanding or whatever, but if you can look on the picture there's a big plume of dust and stuff. And we do get a lot of dust on our vehicles and the smell is nasty. So in the future, is there gonna be, if they expand, is there gonna be things in place for dust and smell? That's my only concern.
Hillary?
Heidi, right?
Yeah.
So, Heidi Feldman.
Okay.
So with regards to any future development, we would send this off to Alberta Environment, and we would have included comments with regards to dust suppression and odor suppression, so their filtration systems, to ensure, because there are a number of acreages close by, that would be something that would be very cognizant of if any new development were to come in.
No,
Yeah.
that's good, because when I called before, they said Environment Canada county has nothing to do with that.
We would send it to them for comment,
Oh, okay.
and then there would be the opportunity for us to ensure that that's put in the permit, yeah.
Okay.
But we
That's
can't
fine.
do anything about existing.
No, that's
yeah.
fine, and I'm not against expanding or whatever, I just wanna make sure that it's not a bigger plume of stuff coming out of there.
Sure.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition? And last call, anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in favor? Is Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in favor? And last call, is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in favor of the bylaw? Hearing none, does council have any last questions? Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the dust question, in the last 20, 25 years that they've been, or since the last permitting, does Alberta Environment have any different regulations now than they would have in the past for basically the dust situation?
I'm not really the subject matter expert, but I would surmise that they would have more stringent regulations with regards to filtration systems on hay plants. I know when we talked to, you might recall earlier this summer when we talked about the hemp facility, they said that there would be no dust coming off of theirs based off of the type of filtration systems they needed in their facility. So I think there has been improvements in that regard. But that would be something if they were to do an expansion, or even if they needed to do some upgrades, that's something that we would look at the permitting phase and make sure that we're following up with that, just because I'm cognizant that there are a lot of residences that live close to there.
Any other questions? Klaus?
So, just to clarify, so this application that they have made right now, that would not be effective to any other expansion subject to in different environmental issues and stuff like that. So basically, this is just an application to, well, what it says here, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's not, they're not planning on doing an expansion, but there was just a thought that if they ever did need to add any new, even accessory buildings, they need to have that zoning in place to support that.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we could close this hearing then. If somebody would like to make a motion? Klaus? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Second reading, if you choose to do so. Klaus?
I'll move that bylaw 21-016 be read for the second time.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. And third. Ken? Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for coming in this morning, everyone. Welcome to stay if you'd wish. Subdivision application 2021-0-142, Sawchuck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's just one subdivision for you to consider today. This application, an application has been made to reconfigure and reduce the size of a approximately 39.5 acre title and reducing it in size to 10 acres. And by consolidating the remaining 29.5 acres to the agricultural lands to the south and west. This proposed subdivision does meet the subdivision criteria of the county's land use bylaw, and I will let Steve go through the planning comments and the recommendation.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, Mr. Chair, this application, as described, is basically to reduce in size a parcel. So we do that through a property line adjustment or reconfiguration of the boundaries between the two parcels. The just over 39 acres, 39.49 acres, of the title, and then the remainder of the quarter section there. So that does involve a subdivision and consolidation. So the existing 39.49 acre there in the north east corner for the country residential title that exists is a old historic title that was originally created for the LSD 8 within the quarter section. This area east of the city in a couple miles, we have back a number of 40 and acre titles in this area that some of them go back between 1960 and 1930 in that area when they were created. So this is a parcel that's historically there for a long time. So the proposed reduced yard parcel size and configuration will remain at the current west boundary of the parcel extension. They want to capture a water turnout situated at this location. The landowner has arranged to transfer the irrigation rights into the pivot area to the agricultural title to the south. The agricultural, which he's saying there's KC Cattle Company, has been farming a large majority of the area in there already through an agreement with the landowner. So that would just be consolidated into their title. So their agricultural title will be enlarged. The two owners have also agreed to a lease agreement for that portion of agricultural land that will remain within the agricultural smaller title. That's going to be reduced to the 10 acres in size. So the surveyor sketch illustrates there are no buildings or improvements in the area of the subdivision line. The existing septic field system is situated just to the west of the dwelling, will remain within the confines of the property with the new adjusted subdivision line. The access is unaffected in the sense that it will remain from the east developed municipal road allowance. However, one of the things that we'll deal with the subdivision here is that the access driveway does traverse slightly over the north property line with the neighbor to the north, which should be relocated entirely within the legal parcel boundaries, which we can deal with now through the subdivision process. It is one of the criteria of the provincial subdivision development regulations that access must be provided to the satisfaction of the subdivision authority. In this case, we have a situation of a trespass in a sense going on. So with the proposal itself, it does meet the county's land use bylaw subdivision criteria regarding a reconfiguration and realignment of title subdivision. There's no standalone title be created here. As mentioned, the existing 39.49 acre parcel is being reduced down in size to 10 acres, and then the agricultural land in the core section is being enlarged by that 10 acres. So it's a land swap going on between the two parcels. During the circulation process, I had to send this out to you a bit early before I left on holidays, so we didn't have all the comments. The circulation period wasn't up yet by the time I had to send it over. So since it came over to you, we did receive comments from Talis, Fortis, and ACO. None of them require an easement or have any objection. We also received comments for the SMRID. They've agreed to and are working with the landowners to do this irrigation transfer between them, so they have no objections. We also received the comments from the city of Lethbridge. It is within the IDP boundary area of the city of Lethbridge. The city has no objections. This sort of realignment complies with the IDP policies with the city, so they have no concerns. And then we also received some comments from the landowners to the north that also speak to the access road situation that I had mentioned. In their comments provided, they do mention that there's been a long-standing encroachment issue between the two families dating back to the 1920s. At that time, the Sawchuck's yard encroached over to the south boundary of the quarter section, which included at that time a barn and shelter belt, both of which were located north of the present driveway. Over the years, there's been understanding between the families that the encroachment exists and that the trees has died and that as the trees died and the barn deteriorated, both would be removed and eventually the driveway to be relocated. The tree shelter belts were removed in the early 2000s, and then the barn was removed several years later. So the last issue that hasn't been dealt with yet is the driveway going over the property line. So the property line, as you can see there, it's kind of maybe a bit hard to tell from the air photo, but it probably lies about in the middle of the current access driveway, as where you can see where it comes in with the trees there. It kind of bumps up to the north a little bit. It's a little bit more clear on some of the earlier air photos, but
On page 8 of the agenda package,
page 8 of the agenda
surveyor-
package.
The survey has the line work on it.
So with that, the owners to the north also asked that the access situation be dealt with here as part of the subdivision process.
Claus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the line that we see there goes through a little bit of the trees there, and then at the other side of the yard. So that is the property of the owner on the north.
That's right, yeah. So they just want to ensure that the access is solely on to the Sawchuck's property.
And like you said, this happened like way back. That this
100
was
years ago.
Okay.
Literally.
So just one other kind of question that comes to my mind. You said that it is rented, or KCL owns the balance of the quarter?
They
own the balance,
of the
yes.
quarter.
So how are you transferring the balance, this for, what is it?
The 29.5
29,
acres.
are you transferring it to their KCL title?
Yes.
That's right.
It
And
will
they're buying it from these guys?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
So it'll be consolidated by plan, so it won't be a standalone title. So KCL's title will be increased by that
Increased,
29
okay.
acres, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, as you can see, I mean, with this almost 40-acre parcel, it's largely a good portion of it is the cultivated land. So KCL, who has been farming it with an agreement with them, it'll become part of their title. So, so from an agricultural point of view, it makes sense, and it does comply with your land use policies for a reconfiguration of titles. So, both the adjusted acreage, which will be 10 acres, complies with your bylaw parcel size, and then the remnant agricultural piece also, which also benefits from, because it's being increased from the current 148, or sorry, it'll be 148.98 acres. So.
Okay. Can you, with your cursor there, can you point out what land is added and what is subtracted?
Sure. Actually, it's this. See this little green dot here? That's the turnout. That's
Okay.
being included in the acreage. So the property line's going to follow that straight to the east-west line.
I think the one picture you see there.
And if you look on page, sorry, I can't see the page number.
Page 7.
7, thank you. Mr. Chairman, on page 7, it shows kind of that
Yeah.
line work on there, where that 10-acre line will be, but it's just to the south of the turnout, because they want to keep the turnout with the acreage.
So, Mr. Chair, so with that, I have recommended approval to you with 5 conditions on there. First, that the property taxes are paid and up to date. Second, that a development agreement be entered into with Lethbridge County if required. The third would be that the titles and portions of land to be subdivided and consolidated to reconfigure the boundaries of the 2 adjacent parcels be done by a plan prepared by a certified Alberta land surveyor in a manner such that the resulting title cannot be further subdivided without your approval as the subdivision authority. So that's the consolidation that's happening, so there's no standalone title. And then the fourth condition would be that the applicant widens to the required carriageway width and relocates the access driveway so that it is situated entirely within the confines of the 10-acre title boundary and no longer encroaches over the north property line, which may involve a survey prepared by an ALS for confirmation to the satisfaction of the municipality. So otherwise, they just have to bump that down a bit, so it's totally on their property on the south side. Now, the fifth condition is that any easements is required by the utility companies be established. Since we've heard back from them all now, none of the utility companies actually needed an easement. But with those conditions and with compliance with your land use bylaw as reconfiguration of titles, I recommend their approval to you.
Any questions? Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can the irrigation turnout be dealt with on an easement rather than be in the subdivision? Because it looks like there's about 6 or 7 acres more farmland being put into this yard subdivision than needs to be.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it maybe could, but the KCL doesn't need it. They have their own. I guess the arrangement the SMRAD made between the two landowners was for it to remain with the other parcel, and they agreed to transfer some of the irrigation rights between them and some of the permanent rights. So I know there was originally a different deal, but the SMRD sent an updated letter that this is what they prefer and what they agreed to. And that's, I think you have in your package item comments under J. No, those ones came in afterwards. Those are the updated ones. So, but I believe as well that they also use that for the yard itself or whatever. So, but the SMRD said that on the 11.9 or 24 or 29.49 acres, sorry, the 11.93 hectares, that's to be consolidated. That they agreed to arrangement that the permanent irrigation rights need to either be sold or transferred to reflect the change in the area, and they agreed to that amount of acres or whatever. So.
But with regards to the turnout itself, I mean, I'm not entirely sure if you can do it, like if it just sounds like they wanted to keep it with the title so that there's no confusion as to ownership in the future. Sometimes we've had in the past, kind of more recently, issues with turnouts being on separate properties where there are easements, and then there's arguments between the landowners. So just from a keeping it simple perspective, it's good to have the turnout tied to the property instead of on an easement. But I do note that, yeah, there's still quite a bit of agricultural land that'll be kind of in their acreage property itself.
Steve?
I just see 10 acres in the future being turned into 4 or 5 lots that are unnecessary. Either I would suggest just approve a 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 acre. They can do an easement, or they can move the turnout or something. That just the future of 4 or 5 lots is unnecessary, I believe.
Is that on underground main line from the SMRD, or is that on their own main line, I wonder, the turnout?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, on that, I can't answer. I don't know, and the SMRD didn't reflect that.
But they have done easements in the past. I just know that they have done them. So.
Go ahead, Klaus.
But if they request to have the water turnout, keep that on their property, that would be for future development to make decisions on that, wouldn't that? Like if they would decide that they wanted to subdivide it into more acreages.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderveen. So with regards to if they did come back, say, as Councillor Campbell, it's pretty easy to anticipate that there could be a future subdivision with 10 acres, that they would have to come and rezone the property first and have like a concept plan or possibly an area structure plan to support that. So there would be opportunities, they would have to come back to council for those decisions to be made, but there's always that possibility that they could come back and ask to subdivide further.
And as it exists now, would there be any encroachments, like setback waivers required? Like, it's really hard to tell from that picture.
No, they're
No?
actually, they meet all this, their buildings meet all the setback requirements. It's just
Okay.
that road, the road approach that encroaches
Yeah.
onto the neighboring property.
Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yep. I guess part of the reason as well for the recommendation too is because even though it'd be maybe preferable to have that extra not included, but for whatever reason, the owner prefers it this way, and this is the deal they made with the KCL to purchase that amount, and with the SMRD as well. But because the other, so if you don't approve that way, you reduce the parcel size. There's the chance that they're not happy with that, and their deal doesn't go through, or they decide to appeal it, or they decide not to do anything at all and just leave it. And then it's the 40 acres that's with the turnout and the cultivated land rather than the 10 acres. So I guess part of the rationale as well, or suggest to you, is that, well, it's probably better to have it reduced to 10 acres than have it sit as it currently is under the 40 acres. It's maybe not the best scenario, but there's a chance that if they don't want, just 5 acres there or something, or 4 acres there, and reduce and take out some of that extra cultivate, that their deal doesn't go through, or they just want a larger parcel and just decide not to do anything, and then it'll still remain as the 40 acres.
Any other questions? Seeing none, if you'd like to proceed, we would need a motion. Claus?
I'll move that subdivision application 2021-0-142 be approved, subject to the conditions as outlined in the resolution.
Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Do you want a 5-minute break? Okay.
Was that a no?
Okay.
Is it firm no? There's no eye contact now?
What? Apparently I'm offline. Oh, everybody is?
I'm cheating. I'm using a cord over here.
Okay, well. Okay, municipal services, information regarding the declaration of agricultural disaster.
Okay, so from our previous meeting on August 5th, there was a request from Councillor Campbell to do some research into what involves declaring an agricultural disaster for an area. The big part from my research and from what I've gleaned from other municipalities is this is a big awareness piece. There is another formal part of being able to declare an actual disaster, but part of that is quite a lengthy process. And with the awareness, with the letter only essentially bringing awareness to the plight that farmers have right now, there's not a lot of merit in going the full extent and going through the whole disaster planning portion. So just from that's a little bit of the background, or sorry, a little bit of the previous direction from the previous meeting, the background information. Vulcan County, MD of Willow Creek, MD of Tabor, all those councils have passed a motion to send a letter of support to the minister due to the ongoing drought conditions. The federal government has announced some relief funding for agricultural producers to date. Lots of that information is attached as extra pieces here, as well as AFC, who is just above us right now, does crop status reports, and we did attach the most recent one here, which shows the extent of the percentages of crops that people are actually bringing in right now. And I'm sure some of our dryland partners here in the room can probably attest to the lack of yields that are essentially they're seeing right now. The alternative to this would be that we just continue to monitor essentially what is going on and waiting further for the next AFC report down the road. This would not change potentially anything about us bringing awareness to that essentially at that time. So we could send no letter to the minister as a result. As far as the financial impact, for us there is no direct financial impact by submitting a letter. There is also this is just a letter of support, and that's why I'm reinforcing that part. It just brings awareness to essentially the ag disaster that we're currently in right now from the drought conditions. It will not actually benefit our ratepayers directly because we have no control over that disaster funding. And that ties into the reasons for my recommendation. Just like our regional partners, I think it's something that there are definite challenges that are being faced by the ag community right now. A letter of support to the minister is prudent at this time. It follows and shows our unity essentially across the region. The only portion that I would recommend against is doing the full formal disaster report. And I'll open the floor for questions.
Ken?
Is this report downloading about 5 minutes already? Is that,
There are several different attachments with this, so it is lengthy. 46 pages worth of information, so there's a lot entailed as part of this. Part of the information that's tagged into this was the RMA had put out a guide for declaring municipal agricultural disasters. That was a part that I'm as part of my recommendation, I'm recommending that we don't go through the full RMA guide. We just send a letter of support, similar to what other municipalities local to us are doing.
So that means that the support credit's applicable, like not necessarily, well, won't be on the irrigation land or anything.
There's not a lot of merit to doing the full, to going through the full declaration process. I think it's just important to send a letter of support to the minister.
So Jeremy, do we send this just to the provincial government, or does this go to the federal government as well? Because the question that's been brought up to me, if you have cattle and you have no pasture land left and you can't find any hay, and you have to sell off your livestock without being in a state of disaster, will you be eligible for the federal government program that is supposedly coming out, where you would be getting tax deferral for selling off your herd?
That would be a question for for a level of government higher than essentially myself. I couldn't really answer that question. As far as the big thing is, AFC would be probably the best, and probably I could arrange for them to come to our next meeting to speak further to that aspect. I would say that requires further research on my part. That's fairly specific and something I didn't go that far into.
Right.
They send a letter.
Yeah, they kind of sent a letter out, yes,
Yeah.
but it's pretty vague, and I don't know whether we actually have to declare a state to make producers eligible to get to that level.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So by the looks of it, the municipalities of Falcon, Willow Creek, and Tabor, and then Lethbridge is the 4 here in the south that we heard of. Have you heard of anybody else that has that are willing to send a letter of support to the government?
I believe
the more that we do, the better it is. Of course, the more strength it has. But like I said too, and then, if we go through the RMA, that would give us way more strength if we would be represented by them in asking for the disaster relief.
thank you for the question. There are several other municipalities. This was just limited to what has just been in the recent months. I know the county of Newell has done similar, and there's quite a few counties to the north that have made that exact same declaration. Just going a little bit further, Mr. Chairman, to your question in regards to the merit of, where does this all work out for the ag community? The province is the big overriding piece, essentially, in declaring this piece of disaster, and obviously statistics and information through AFSC are very important to that aspect. Very much, the province can only allocate a certain amount of funding potentially as well, but I mean the big portion comes from the federal government. So as a municipality, we have very little fiscal influence essentially on that. It's more, like I said, it's the awareness piece. But I will do further research to find out whether or not there is any specifics to a localized disaster occurrence. I know if it's for a natural disaster such as flooding or tornado, something to that effect, that there is disaster recovery program that the province has, as well as there are other programs through the federal government, depending on the extent. Fires, similar kind of thing. I'm not sure how that ties into agriculture because of the insurance effects and so on.
Okay. Any other questions? Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Didn't Vulcan County, MD of Willow Creek, and MD of Tabor all declare disaster as well? Online, I see news articles suggesting that they did. So, if that's right, then I think that we need to follow the same suit, in case there is funding that our cow-calf producers don't get because we don't declare disaster. Then we're not doing our producers any favor at all.
Morris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, there is that would give it strength if we join two and call our county a disaster too. However, I'm not even sure if it's needed, because I thought the province and federally they said already there is a disaster already, and I'm not sure if we gotta follow through on that or whatever. I think if we didn't follow through, we still fall under the disaster area. That's the way I kind of look at it. But however, of course, we will send a letter of support, yeah.
This goes all across Canada with British Columbia, Ontario. I don't know what it means. And they got, looks like, would be probably like a county with all the numbers behind the.
They're asking for the letter of support, so I think we should just go ahead with that anyways. Absolutely.
Yep. But who's asking for a letter of support? Like, I think there's a difference between what Steve has said and what we're talking about. That's all. I have no problem sending.
I'm not sure who's asking, but I think, for what we've seen, what's happening, I think we should, I don't think anybody really asked to send a letter of support, is it?
There's no, I mean, any letter of support is not a requirement, similar to our Beet Growers Association. This is, you're looking for, I think it's good to bring attention to this. It's not like it's not known. I mean, this is across the whole of Canada essentially right now.
Yeah.
Manitoba was the first to provincially to really declare, and then some of the funding has started to come out, and then even, you know, some of this, like there's a livestock tax deferral initial assessment. I mean, this has been going on for a period of time over the last several months as this has steadily progressed, and we're right in the midst of it ourselves.
Dory?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Morris, at the last meeting, I made the notice of motion to bring this forward. And the only reason, well, I shouldn't say the only, one of the reasons I did is just because I know just right around that time, as Steve had said, the MD of Tabor did, from what this reads and what my knowledge is, they did declare a state of agricultural disaster. So I just thought that it would be important that we have this discussion, and maybe I think I was misinformed on how the potential funding might happen, so I'm glad that Jeremy clarified some of that. I'm obviously fully in support of forwarding a letter to the Provincial Minister of Agriculture just indicating the issues that producers are facing. But at the same time, I would have to agree with Steve as well. If all of our neighbors are formally declaring a state of agricultural disaster, I would like to maybe dive into that a little further and see if that is something that just the strength in numbers, and should we be doing that, what that looks like. But at this point, I would definitely be in favor of sending that letter off.
Any other comments? We could use a motion then. Go ahead, Dory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would then move that a letter be sent to the Provincial Minister of Agriculture regarding the current status of agriculture in our county and the issues that producers are facing, and possibly to bring forward to a future meeting maybe some further information regarding a formal declaration of disaster.
Okay. Any other discussion? Steve?
Just a question, what more would we actually need to declare disaster?
Oh, I don't know that.
You could do a formal declaration from council, right, that we are declaring an agricultural disaster.
Because I know in
As
the
a point of motion.
I know in the RMA document it says to do your do research, do check fields, stuff like that. Well, I don't think that's necessary at all. I think we just add a declaration of disaster.
I would be more than comfortable to pull that last part back and, as Steve said, declare.
So do you send that letter to the ag minister too? Or who does that go to? If you declare a state, like what you're suggesting, Steve?
Would be the ag minister, wouldn't it?
Still go to the same place?
I think it goes to the same place. I'd have to go through all the details in the RMA guide
No, you gotta go to the top right away.
to the province you're talking? Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, the information goes to the province, yeah.
So,
Do you want me to try again?
well, maybe just amend it a bit. or
Yeah.
change
So. So that I would move that the county declare a agricultural disaster due to the ongoing drought conditions and extreme high temperatures, and forward a letter to Minister Dreeshen indicating our concerns.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Call for the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, council. And we do have a ASB meeting next week as well, so we can also further discuss this at that time.
Okay. So how do you get the information back on your iPad? I've tried everything I can think of.
Did you go totally out?
Yeah, I signed out and didn't make any difference.
We will,
Oh. Okay. Well,
we'll get the IT department and
yeah, it keeps coming back offline mode. So I don't know.
Just press OK.
I did,
And
yeah.
just go in there, doesn't help at all. No.
Then you go back there and,
Okay. Yeah, mine just went back and opened things up, so.
okay, next up is tangible capital assets. Yes, you push
your cellular's not even working.
so it does. Push that. Push this again and it comes back the same damn thing. Oh, yeah, I got nothing there. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is just with regards to the tangible capital asset policy. As you know, we have been doing policy review, but in conjunction with that and the asset management program, the asset management team reviewed the tangible capital asset policy with particular focus on our asset categories, estimated useful life, and asset thresholds, just to ensure that the policy actually aligns with the county's evolving asset management practices, as well as current legislation. The original policy was developed back in 2009 when the province introduced the TCA and the PSAB requirements. At that time, the province had sort of a TCA policy template, which most of the municipalities within the province adopted. And just with the way things have evolved and where we're moving with asset management, we thought this was a good time to update the policy so it aligns more properly and reflects how we're currently managing things. So Mike is here as well because he is our asset management program lead and was quite involved in the process of updating the policy. There's a lot of terminology things you probably don't have access to your policy right now, but updating titles, just some housekeeping around verbiage. We included a playgrounds, which wasn't previously in there. kind of hit the highlights for you here. We added a small section just to ensure that the PSAB requirements were included in the policy. There's 2 of them, so we just had a little comment there. One of the things was our capitalization thresholds. So this defines the minimum value of expenditures on an asset, and at which time we determine whether or not we're going to capitalize or count that asset as a capital. So land improvements, for example, was at $7,500. We bumped that up to $25,000. So that would be things such as the paving of the parking lot here at the administrative building, or a pathway, or things like that. Machinery and equipment, vehicles, and other betterments were all at $7,500. So we bumped machinery and equipment and vehicles up to $10,000 and betterments up to $20,000. So those were the changes to the thresholds within the asset descriptions. Overall, though, those descriptions align with the asset management program as well as what we're doing with the TCA recording in our year-end financials.
So before you leave that, I don't quite follow what you mean by you say you bumped them up.
So the threshold amount was sitting at $7,500. So anything at $7,500 and above was counted as capitalized as a capital asset. But based on, I guess, costs now and where we're at, we moved those betterment thresholds, or pardon me, those asset thresholds up. So for example, like land improvements to $25,000, because $7,500 could be capturing operational maintenance things rather than capitalized projects that we're working on. So it's just to increase those thresholds to align more with costs, today's costs.
Okay, I guess I understand it now.
Okay. And then just kind of moving through the policy.
Question?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Chairman. Like, the land improvement area, you got it to $25,000, but what can you get for that? And the same as the other ones, I mean, it's way out of the league of when you're gonna make improvements, that number is correct or even enough.
Yeah, Councillor Vanderveen, through the chair, those are the minimums. So it would be anything above that number that we would capitalize. So that would be anything below that we wouldn't necessarily capitalize. So it kind of brings that up higher because costs are higher. We had just added some verbiage around asset disposals. So an asset disposal would occur in the case of a sale, a trade-in, a loss, a transfer of an asset, or an abandonment of an asset. So we just added a little section that the county recognizes that liabilities may need to be recorded for asset retirement obligations as per the Public Sector Standards Board regulations. An asset retirement obligation is a legal obligation associated with the retirement of a TCA as per PSAB 3280. So that was just a recommendation to include that clause, just so we're covered, and through the year-end process, any of those entries that need to be done will be accounted for. And then lastly, there's Appendix A, and this is the recommended useful life of all of our assets. So there's a list of assets by class, and then it gets a bit more descriptive as we move through. Some of these, again, this was a template from the province, so we reviewed it and considered what we're actually doing here at the county and what makes more sense. So I can even get Mike to give more detail, but the first example would be a gravel parking lot had a 15-year useful life, where 25 years is probably more in line with the actual life of something like that. You wouldn't necessarily replace, you'd obviously do some betterments to that or add gravel, but as far as requiring a full replacement, we thought a 25-year life made more sense. So I'll just pass it to Mike to kind of go through these in a bit more detail.
Okay, so there's several of them, and they go up and down. Some we thought were quite high, and some we thought were quite low based on what we see today. You know, how the industry is, you know, these life expectancies are now today versus, 10, 12 years ago. You know, engineered structures is a big one for us, of course. We've got roadway systems on our bridges and our roads and all that. And so you'll see in there, you know, we've added in the different types of roadway we have. You know, now we've got our different arterial roads, collector roads, local roads, instead of just a paved road or a hot mix road. Those all have different build standards, and so they have a different life, and therefore, with that adjustment in life, we're actually projecting our future replacement costs a little more accurately. Same with bridges. You know, we had bridges in there, a major bridge at a 100-year life. Well, we're not gonna see that probably. It's more realistic to be around that 75 mark. Culverts, they had an 80-year life. We're not seeing 80 years out of a culvert, hopefully. It should be replaced long before that. So that kind of carries through. And then we've made some additions in there where our water system, you know, we've broken it down into more components instead of just the overall system. You know, so now we have a trunk line in the regional area, or the regional lines versus just a main line that, you know, we were treating the regional lines the same as a main line in a hamlet, for example, and they are different. So we've broken it down a little bit further where it needs to be. Valves and wells, those are additions. Same sort of thing in the wastewater system. We've added a couple more categories to better capture the individual components and how they age. What else in there? Storm system, no major changes there, just one addition. Machinery and equipment, that's still a tricky one that we're working on. We've got a variable life in there, and we're further working on that behind the scenes to determine, you know, the specific type of equipment, what the life is on that, and we're working with.
Claus?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I'm going back to the culverts and stuff like that you have there. You were talking about the steel culverts.
Yeah.
Are there no different kind of culverts that would last like the 100 years that you're talking about?
I would have to ask Jeremy or Devin about that specifically, the material types and
Because you would think over the years, there's so much improvement in material and whatever they do that, you know, we're in 2021 right now, so you would say you have it's more than a lifetime.
Yeah, I think mainly it's because we use only steel culverts, is my understanding. We don't use any other material.
A lot of it does depend on sometimes future price points as well. Steel culverts come in varying different sizes, like you can get different wall thicknesses and so on, as well as in certain situations, even like a steel pipe is the future replacement, because you can do steel liners on culverts through large draws, which is more cost efficient in the long term. It is very much dependent on, for the steel portion, it's dependent on kind of your general soil conditions. I mean, when you have more alkali conditions, you're looking at shorter lifespans on those types of things. Moving into stuff like plastic, different polys and stuff like that, lots of those these polys are forecasted for, they're a bit of an unknown as well. People are saying those ones could be good for 75 to plus years, but nobody's actually seen it last that long to this point. So it's even for some of the things within the TCA policy, these are estimates. These are estimates based on what we know now, right? If there is new technology, new materials that come into the forefront, then we have to look at those as well. We did look recently at speaking just to the culvert one, we did look at the cost of the plastic versus steel option, and the plastic, I believe, was almost a 2 or 3 times multiplier as far as cost, with a potential unknown lifespan. So in that case, then we have to make some economic decisions as far as that going ahead.
Go ahead, Jen.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to add before Mike gets into further, when we're speaking about useful life too, this is kind of the period in which the asset is expected to be used by the government. It doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of 20 years there'll be a full replacement, because in that lifetime we expect to do improvements or maintenance on different items, which would bring that life back again in some cases. So like a road, for example, will never see the end of its life, but through maintenance and betterments, it will back it up and make improvements. And this is part of how the asset management program will help us too, because we can set those schedules, those maintenance events or schedules, and determine its life or where it's at or what it requires at different times during its life. So
It didn't work.
Oh, no.
Is it when you touched it or what?
Must be.
Why don't you go sit beside Morris?
It's okay.
There's ID, I swear. Thanks.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, and on the last page there, there's not much else, just same, a couple of minor adjustments under our machinery and equipment categories, just for what we see now with the useful life. It's just more in line with what we see today and what we expect to see moving forward. And like Jen said, we review these and we're always monitoring this stuff, and so we'll make adjustments where needed. Then the very last thing is there's just a very last part of this policy was an asset disposal form, which I don't know that we've used in a long time. We don't use it, a paper form nowadays, so we're just removing that from the policy. Their internal processes, via email or whatever that, flag these things, and we don't have a use for that form, I guess. So we're pulling that out of the policy, and I think from what Jen said and then going through these, that's all I've got.
With the asset disposal too, through the asset management program, we're developing I guess it's a procedural document for how we're going to handle who's responsible for the disposals, who's going to be notified when they're done, and to ensure at year end that it's captured properly. So this form isn't really relevant anymore based on how we're going to be moving forward with the new program and software that we have in place.
So just a question, when you talked about asset disposal, so if you take something to get rid of it, say at an auction sale, are you notified before it goes to the auction sale?
Myself?
Finance department, yeah.
I'm not generally notified prior to it going to the auction sale, other than what has been put into the budget. So,
Because the reason I ask you the question is, so you get paid, I assume it comes to the finance department, not that department. How do you know, how do you follow the process that's going on? Like if you're unaware it's being sold, how do you follow the process through?
it's kind of a two-step process on my end. With the example of equipment, we'll stick with the equipment example. I would get a copy of the Ritchie Brothers, I don't know what you want to call it, report or disbursement, which generally has the details, and then I contact Ron or Jeremy, and one of them will provide me with the details of that ID number to ensure that I'm disposing of the correct grader, for example. Like if it's MG30, and I'm not just picking some random grader out of our asset listing. So there is communication taking place currently when that stuff comes through, and I always confirm the ID on that asset before I dispose of it.
Yeah, just to further reinforce that, each of our, on the equipment side, each of our assets in that regard has a number associated to it, and as part of our overall insurance policy. So when it does, we don't take our insurance off it. We don't basically go through the disposal portion until we've actually sold the asset. And there are several different options for auction companies as well, and our goal is with anything is to basically gain the greatest financial return on any of these, which is typically through the market or potentially an equipment trade-in with an equipment manufacturer.
I also keep a spreadsheet where I list everything that I've seen come in, and then it can be updated, and the costs that the funds that we've received for it, and then I do have it verified by the fleet department as well. So
It just seemed like there was a piece missing to me. Like if you don't know it's being sold, how do you account for it? That's all
Yeah.
I mean, if you decide to, you're gonna know anyway through the budget, but if it doesn't go, say, in February, it goes, say, in December, if you don't get a notice of it going to be sold or be traded or whatever the case is, how do you know what's happening? That's all I meant.
If I can just a little
Yeah,
further,
go
I
ahead.
think that's it's one of the challenges that we've come across is the internal process. And I think as we move or get more and more skilled or mature, I guess, with this asset management software being centralized, kind of brings everybody into the same room. And something like a disposal, we're hoping that we can get a process in place where who's ever responsible for that asset, whatever category it be, when they're doing their planning, they can, put a flag on certain assets to say, these will be disposed. They're not, but we're planning for that. And then Jen would see that as well. And we can start centralizing that information a bit better so we can, I guess, better that communication, so it's not having to be here's my spreadsheet, and, we mix and match. But it's certainly something we're working on,
Okay.
fine tuning for sure.
So, some equipment disposal is very much like equipment purchasing right now. Manufacturers are forecasting 6 to 18 months potentially on the delivery of some different products. So, I mean, we can't necessarily narrow down what that disposal is. I mean, this year has been particularly challenging in that equipment has been delayed substantially due to microchip issues, transportation issues, COVID outbreaks in factories. So it's variable essentially from time to time. Our purchase plan has an associated disposal with most of those pieces of equipment that come forward essentially for purchase. So that's based on a range. I mean, the idea is as soon as that equipment lands, then we begin the disposal process. But like I said, that could be, I could tell Jen I'm expecting graders in April this year, which is what my expectation was, but they never showed up until the end of May, beginning of June. So then you're not really having a clear timeline. And then in some cases, especially on the disposal side, you want to be able to seize the best number for your asset. Well, in Alberta, typically, from an auction standpoint, the spring auctions are the big sale auctions versus you put it later into the summer, you're at the mercy of the market essentially at that point, because most contractors or companies in general have done the majority of their purchasing, and this is kind of the late mid-season stuff. That's why you see, the auctions in the summer times are a little bit more spread out essentially with less competition.
Okay. Any other questions? So we need a motion then to approve the revisions. of
Yes,
policy.
please.
Ken? Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Quarterly financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a quarterly financial report up to July 31st, and being that there was only one meeting in August, it got put to the September meeting, as well as having a tax deadline of July 31st. You want to ensure that all of your payments are in prior to, now we're really in trouble, prior to completing the reports, so.
Everything's on the fritz this morning.
Oh boy, we got some real issues.
Related to mine.
No, the other ones work except the financial one doesn't work.
Mine works now.
I'll see if I can get this open here.
Our current system says none of you are connected now as well, so. I'd like to
Okay.
say we get delay for lunch and it might get better, but I think we have to push on.
Are these TVs off now?
That's a different remote.
Oh,
Go to the next one then. Go to the emergency advisory.
Do you want to go to emergency advisory then? Or do you want to?
Maybe. I was hoping to show you the dashboard and
Yeah, I think we should move to we'll move to that portion. I think it's very important that we go through the financial dashboard here so that you can all visually see these as well as be connected. Larry, you good with that?
I am ready whenever.
All right.
Yeah, let's try that one then.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
This is one of these sideways ones.
Yeah.
It's sideways in here. It's okay. If I look like this, you know why.
Your page is sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been having a bit of that too. Like,
Yep, yeah, well. Go ahead, Larry.
okay, thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, Council. Good morning, everyone. Seems like a while since I've been up in front of you here, but here we go. And I just have a very, very short report here on the Emergency Advisory Committee. And this was requested by our Chief Administrative Officer, Ann Mitchell. So we'll just present this briefly today to just give everyone just, I guess, really a little bit of a refresher as to, kind of the purpose and intent of having an emergency advisory committee. And hopefully if some members of the public are watching too, this will help them just understand what the role of that committee is. So the requirement to have that emergency advisory committee, EAC, is established under the Emergency Management Act. With respect to a recommendation here today, Mr. Chairman and Council, we're not looking for any particular recommendation. Again, just sort of a bit of an update for everyone present. Previously, Council has had an emergency advisory committee for quite a few years. I don't know how long, but probably 20 years or perhaps more, and maybe some members of Council who've been around longer than I have will recall, but it's well established and entrenched in the legislation. As well, we have terms of reference for that committee, which kind of just help to guide a little bit of how it functions. And earlier this year, in February, revised emergency management bylaw was approved by Council, and that just made some and acknowledged some changes to the provincial legislation and the Emergency Management Act, and it made some, I think, for the most part, minor requirements to be included in municipalities' emergency management bylaw. So, broadly speaking, the primary purpose of that Emergency Advisory Committee is just to provide oversight at a high level of municipal emergency management. Really, it kind of speaks more to disaster management than day-to-day, smaller incidents where a fire truck or an emergency vehicle might go to. Section 11.1 of the Emergency Management Act states that the EAC must include one or more elected officials. In our case, of course, that committee is made up of 3 members of Council. And it also states the role of the committee is to advise on the development of emergency plans and programs. Again, fairly high level, just sort of oversight to the whole emergency response program. In recent years, I think at the fault of staff, that the functioning of the committee maybe has expanded in its scope a little bit. And I think that's what our Chief Administrative Officer was getting at, just to, again, kind of bring it back to where it should be and the purpose of this report today. So some of our agendas maybe included items that typically might not or should not have gone to the Emergency Advisory Committee, but that's all in the past. We have a renewed view, I guess, of the role of that committee. And consequently, again, here's what we're presenting today. The committee must meet at least once per year, as outlined in the Emergency Management Act and our Emergency Management Bylaw, and Section 6 of that bylaw, which is attached to your agenda that I think none of you can see at this moment, does outline some of the further functions of the committee, and that's, for example, looking at declaring a state of local emergency and reviewing emergency response plans and making recommendations to Council. There are no direct financial impacts for having this committee, and it is, again, an obligation. So, not having it is not an option. We wouldn't be meeting the provincial legislation if we didn't have a committee, but we do. And honestly, Mr. Chairman, that's it. I don't want to dwell on and on here, but it was just, again, as requested by our Chief Administrative Officer, just to put that out there to anyone listening today, the basic role of the Emergency Advisory Committee for Lethbridge County. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Any questions?
Pardon me? I am.
Yes, it does. No, nobody else's does? So, and you say this committee meets at a minimum of once a year?
That's correct, yes. We're obligated to meet at least once a year. That's one of the
Okay.
requirements, yes. For a few years there, when I first joined the county, the committee was meeting, I'm not sure, maybe every few weeks, 6, 8 weeks, kind of thing, multiple times, which, maybe there was purpose and need and that was appropriate at the time, but we don't have to meet that much as long as we meet that once per year at very minimum.
Well, it seems like the role has kind of changed a bit. So, because committees used to meet with the committees from other municipalities, which doesn't happen anymore. So is that something you're kind of proposing to bring back?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Not necessarily. I don't know that we're really, or that our Chief Administrative Officer was intending for that or proposing that. If appropriate and there's, value and purpose, by all means, we could request, to meet with any of the committees that the other municipalities have. Partly, perhaps, as our world has changed in the last 18 months with the pandemic, there hasn't been many meetings as there may have been in the past, but that's always open and always an option if it's deemed, that would serve a purpose for us.
Well, it seems to me in discussion with some of the other people from other communities, that's something they want. But it's something we have not been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bit of a split there, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah. My thought would be, Mr. Chairman, if they requested that, of course, I think we would respond, put it to our committee and have a meeting with them, or vice versa, if our committee meets or council gives some direction to the committee to meet to address a specific issue maybe that's come up between ours and one or more of the urban municipalities, by all means, that could be arranged any time, for sure.
Clause.
But wouldn't it be wise of the other, because I don't know if because we're talking about the emergency committees within our jurisdiction that we're working with here. So if they would want to meet more, all they would have to do is contact probably you, because you're kind of the coordinator for the emergency thing. So, and set something up and have a meeting.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And in fact, the Director of Emergency Management, in this case, that we contract through the town of Coaldale, happens to be Clayton Rutberg at this time. They could contact him as well, and, he could work through that or come more directly to us and do that. One thing on that note, I'll just make a note of that council may not, or maybe you are aware of, but we've asked that Mr. Rutberg come to the county office once a week or thereabouts, and starting right away here in September, I think next week might be the first time he's scheduled, at least 3, perhaps 4 days a week for several hours, or 4 times a month, pardon me, for several hours. He's going to come to our office, and we just feel that sort of having that face-to-face ability to meet with some of our staff more involved at the emergency management level, it'll just help us kind of just tighten things up a little bit. Again, it's been hard doing everything remotely and not being able to meet face to face. So we're optimistic about that, and when we suggested that to the town of Coaldale, they were receptive to that. So that, I think, is just a little sidebar, but a positive step with respect to emergency management overall.
Clearly, you're talking about the Barron's Fire Chief, right?
No.
No, sorry, just for clarification, our Director of Emergency Management, who is Clayton Rutberg, right? So him as the Lethbridge County Director of Emergency Management, he'll be coming here. To this point, we've had that contract now, I think, for about 1.5 years with the town of Coaldale, having them provide that Director of Emergency Management service to Lethbridge County. But he hasn't had regular office time here. So we're simply we asked, and they agreed to allow him and grant him the ability to come to our office physically. And we're going to have an office downstairs, and he's just going to spend a bit of time there each week to facilitate, closer discussion and enhance communication, really.
So on that, because because it was in my head. What is the progress with our, I don't know what his name is, the chief of Barrett's, because he's working for the county right now. Have you guys heard anything of what he's doing, or just to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, through Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Vanderveen's question, absolutely. And in fact, at the September 16th meeting, and we could have done it today, but it didn't happen, but we'll bring Byron Fraser, Mr. Fraser, forward to just kind of introduce him, I guess, to council and the public formally. But he's acting, you're right, in that temporary role, scheduled to go until the end of 2021 as the Fire Services Coordinator for Lethbridge County. And he's working very closely with the fire chiefs of our contracted municipalities to establish one of the big things we need, and he's working on, is to establish response protocols, so that when a certain category or type of 911 call comes in, there's essentially a list that says, when this call happens, here are the types and number of emergency vehicles and personnel that should go. You know, it just sort of gives some parameters, whereas, you know, historically it's been left up to the discretion of those fire departments. So we're just trying to make sure we're being as efficient with the, you know, finite resources that we have. So that's one of the big things he's doing. He's looking at equipment. He's working with dispatch to, you know, just again tighten up some things that maybe are not where they should be, creating some efficiencies, and we'll bring him forth, like I say, to introduce him formally to council and the public, I believe on September 16th. As well, we'll have a bylaw to present to council to consider regarding fire services at that time. And I'm sure, you know, as we go along a little bit, we'll give council maybe a little bit more formal update as to what he's working on and what he's accomplished to, you know, that date and that sort of thing.
So getting back to the Director of Emergency Management, he's coming in here to do exactly what? I'm not quite sure I follow it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's he actually going to do? I don't.
Right.
Different from what he's doing now.
Sure. So one of the things is we'll have face-to-face meetings. You know, that was part of the idea, and talk about and review our emergency plans, plan for emergency advisory committee meetings, review overall, you know, emergency management practices, maybe changes that are coming down the line. We just kind of feel that for the funds and through that contract that the county's paying, you know, we know the service is there, and he's very good at what he does, and the town's very good at providing that service to Lethbridge County when needed. But we just feel we could maybe get a little bit more for, again, the funds that the county's putting towards them. So, you know, he may not be here for 7 or 8 hours in a day, but perhaps 3 or 4. And, you know, I guess it'll be a bit of an experiment, and we'll just see how that pans out.
Morris?
So basically what you're saying down there, seeing where we can get some better efficiency in the departments.
Yeah, I think so. Councillor Zinstra, again, well, we're talking about Clayton Rutberg right now, not the internal fire services coordinator. So just overall disaster management, plan some training for staff as well. That would be another big part of it, because has a high level of qualification to provide training in incident command and emergency management and emergency coordination center training and so on.
Ken?
So, I understand that he's in charge of all the fire calls, and is he gonna, when they need, they wanna demonstration or something like that, do they take all the people from whatever is in there into one, like, thing, like when you had the one for, in the thing there, basically, the training that they take now is gonna be amalgamated from all of the fire halls.
Right, if I may, Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Benson, just to be clear, our Director of Emergency Management doesn't oversee those individual fire departments per se, but he would perhaps, if there were a major disaster, a large fire out in the county where multiple departments were required, he might be the incident commander and he would kind of be directing and controlling them on behalf of the county. But as far as training goes, I was kind of meaning more internally for staff, emergency management training to ensure that staff are all up to level. We're still short in some areas with respect to our training. And emergency management, I think we always sort of look at it as insurance. If you don't use it for a long time, you sometimes wonder, well, why do we have it? But then when you need it, it's there for you, and it's important to have regular training at least a couple times a year for staff. So we're just looking for him to help us out in that regard. So
They're all still independent,
yes.
which is not what we want.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move the Emergency Advisory Committee review report for information.
I think this is something that probably should be brought back to the new council. I understand. It's not very clear as to what exactly it does. To me, anyway. Okay,
Certainly, yep. Thank you.
any other comments? Call for the question, those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks.
You're welcome, thank you.
Do we have, anybody have any other information? Because it's gonna be difficult to continue without some information in front of you. We could do the helicopter. Is that you, Larry?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead and do it then.
Okay, thank you. So again, just really a bit of an update, or maybe council wishes to go in a different direction with this. Just to summarize, the Provincial Helicopter Emergency Medical Services Review, otherwise known as HEMS, just the acronym, it's been completed by Alberta Health. It recommends having one service provider rather than the current 3 in the province. However, no action or decisions on those recommendations have yet been made or taken by the provincial government. So again, we're not necessarily looking for any kind of direction or resolution from council today, although of course that is your prerogative. Just a little bit of the brief history here. Back in September of 2019, gosh, almost 2 years ago now. Well, 2 years ago. What am I saying almost? Here we are at September 2nd. So council sent a letter to the provincial government urging them to provide $750,000 funding to Halo Air Ambulance to help them through to the next contract, and calling on the government to commission an independent review of the helicopter emergency management system in Alberta. And that, I think that was born out of a visit we had by the executive director of Halo, a gentleman named Paul Carolyn. And yeah, that's what came out of that. So here we are already 2 years later. It took that long. At that time, there was a letter from Cypress County that recommending that Alberta municipalities commit $20 per capita for 5 years to Halo. But ultimately, in response, Lethbridge County Council at that time decided that until a provincial review overall of the overall funding model for the HEM system in Alberta was completed, it wasn't really in a position to make an informed decision. So since that time then, again, and just to maybe anyone watching out there in the virtual world, STARS, HALO, and HERO are the three services, the emergency air ambulance services, which cover the province, and roughly STARS is probably, well, it definitely is the biggest one and covers the most territory, and they cover kind of the central and primarily the central, I guess, and most populated part of the province, as well as HALO covers primarily the southeast, and then the northern parts of the province are covered by HERO, and I'll identify those acronyms in just a moment here. The HEM service delivery model was again reviewed. June is when the final report came out, and the goals were to define HEMS providers, standardize practices, and determine the most efficient funding model that will support the services that Albertans need with respect to emergency air ambulance rescue and services. So I've attached the recommendations to this report. Again, alternatives, we haven't defined any. We're presuming only that council, again, may wish to wait until the province acts on any of these recommendations before it makes any funding decisions. But again, totally council's prerogative, and we'll leave that up to them. But just quickly, for anyone who is interested, STARS is Shock Trauma Air Rescue Service. That's that acronym. HERO, Helicopter Emergency Response Organization. And that one's kind of up in the Wood Buffalo Regional Emergency Services area. And then HALO, the one that we're more familiar with maybe down here in southern Alberta, is Helicopter Airlift Operation. And again, I apologize, it's unfortunate you maybe don't have access to your agendas right now, but there's a really nice chart here. I'll just sort of flash it. It's the last page of the 4-page report. And for each of those three services, it describes their full name, the level of service they provide, their service area, base location, who provides dispatch, number and models of helicopters deployed, whether or not they have night flying capability, events per year that they attend, annual operating expenses, and so on. Just on that events per year, just quickly I'll point out that the statistics here show that on average, STARS responds to 1,255 calls per year, HERO to 62 calls per year, and HALO to 38 calls per year. Probably the key recommendation, and there are a number of them, but Mr. Chairman, I'll point out the key recommendation coming out of the review was that Alberta Health Services negotiate a service performance-based contract with STARS to provide helicopter emergency management services throughout Alberta, with the provincial government providing 50% of their annual operating costs. And then there are a number of other referrals or recommendations, rather, maybe you won't go through them all, but in short, they've recommended that there be one service and not three. So, but again, they haven't acted on that, and I guess, time will tell what actions they may choose to take and which direction they may go. And that is a summary of the report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the HALO, it covers only southeastern part of the province. Does it ever come to Lethbridge? That's one question. The other one is with the provincial government, you probably don't have no idea either when this is going to come up for discussion, that the recommendation that we would like to see was that we have one emergency department with the helicopters.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Van der Veen. Through the chair, personally, I'm not certain. I don't know with any certainty whether or not HALO comes to Lethbridge. I don't know if anyone else has seen them.
Jeremy?
The zone for HALO specifically just covers the eastmost fringe of the Lethbridge area. So it doesn't cover, STARS has the majority of the zone for the primary portion of Lethbridge County. So I'd say about a 90 to 95% is STARS coverage. Not to say that in any instance, depending on what that emergency is, that Halo would be dispatched accordingly as reinforcement for STARS.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, sorry, it's interesting, they didn't provide a map, to kind of show their geographic areas. That might be helpful, but I think as Mr. Wixon has explained and suggested, and this is what I gleaned from it just at a high level, that if STARS were called and they weren't available, they'd go to Plan B and look at, Hero or Halo and maybe veer outside of their normal response area in a critical situation. But so that was one question. Then you had a second question about the one service. And again, the recommendation coming out of this review was that things essentially be consolidated to that one service. But I think the jury is still out on whether or not they'll follow through and make that a reality, or retain 2 or 3 services as is the current situation.
So, again, go ahead, Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just thinking down there, if the province, would like to see just one company giving the services down there. However, now we have the 3. Is there, and I'm looking at the charges they charge, is there a competition on that end of it, or is it flat rates, period? Doesn't matter if it is 1 or 3. I'm a little puzzled over that one.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Zeenstra, and through the chair. So are you asking, like, as far as paying them goes, who's paying them, or how much per call, or?
There's a competition there now, and if the province decides to go with the 1, are they going to be able to charge whatever they feel like it, or is there, or are they getting paid now already on a certain pickup or whatever?
Right, and I apologize, I didn't go into that level of research, so I'm not certain, but I appreciate what you're saying. Sometimes with a monopoly and only one service provider, that definitely can have an impact on prices, although I would like to think the province would have limits and make sure that they weren't overcharging if there was just that one service. But
I think they currently only get paid whatever the rate is, no matter who brings the person to the hospital. The difference seems to be in the amount of their operational costs, and STARS is higher than both Hero or Halo. That was their biggest thing. Why are you supporting them over us? So, it's fine to say we should have one service, which makes logical sense. I think the biggest concern is, will they then provide enough of helicopters to cover off the areas these other people are now servicing? And that's a question I don't think this report has touched. Tori.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know in the past there had been a lot of discussion at Mayors and Reeves about this. Is it, since the report has come out, has it been addressed at all, or?
No.
No.
Hasn't been. Because I think the report's only been released.
it was late June, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Yep.
So. Klaus?
Just a comment that, Hero and Halo, they started up for a reason. And I think that because the other ones, it didn't cover the whole province, so they found it necessary, in my opinion. I think that's maybe correct. That's why they started up, because I mean, there's a reason why you start up a business like that.
You're correct. So I don't think there's an awful lot we can do about this till, unless you want to send a letter to the provincial government suggesting that if you only have one service, they need to cover off the areas the other people are currently covering. It's up to you guys.
Yeah, not sure if I fully favor that support for the service.
Okay.
Well,
Klaus?
I think that, well, the way Larry referred to everything, that last time that we talked about it, 2019, that we preferred the one service, that was in your report. Was that we preferred the one service, or were there more municipalities involved in that one?
So we get our service only from Stars.
Yeah.
We don't, I shouldn't say we don't get any from Halo. I know of very few incidents where we got anything from Halo. But the biggest complaint about Stars going to where Halo goes is they can't fly from Calgary to the location south, say south of Medicine Hat and back to Calgary on the fuel they have. Whereas Halo, being closer to that area, can fly directly to Calgary. I mean, there's a lot of logistical things. And the helicopters that Halo and Hero use are the old ones that Stars doesn't use anymore, or that style of helicopter. I mean, it's so complex and complicated, it's hard to say.
Just to clarify, if I may, Mr. Chairman, thank you. In my records here, when I was just researching a little bit for this brief report, the resolution that council made in 2019 wasn't clearly stating that, you know, it supported or didn't support one service, but it was rather that council resolved that until a provincial review of the funding model for the overall service is completed, it's not in a position to make a funding decision. Now, I guess that review's been done, but there's some recommendations out of it, and, you know, it sort of seems to me like maybe it's not been finished, and I'm not sure if council has the full information and wishes to, you know, go down that road or consider that yet, at least.
Okay. I think we can just leave this one alone for now. So if we don't have any more information, I can't see us proceeding with too much more here. Does anybody have access to info? You do? I do. Do you, Morris? No?
Yeah.
You do?
But not on the financial part, but I got on administration, I'm on.
What's your recommendation, Jeremy?
I think you just accept it for information as per Larry's recommendation right now.
Oh, yeah, that one, but I meant to continue on with the rest of the agenda.
No, we should break for lunch, sorry.
Okay, then I'll move that we take Larry's presentation for information.
Any discussion? Okay, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you, council.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have all the other ones except for the financial ones.
Oh, I got everything now. So do you want to do the financial one now?
Yep.
Okay.
We're back in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about earlier. I guess I'll take the blame for that.
No.
So I've got for you the financial summary up to July 31st, which was, of course, also our tax due date. With this financial summary, I'm just going to show you, I built this sort of quarterly financial dashboard. I had seen a sample of it. I thought it was kind of a nice snapshot. I kind of was hoping for some feedback from council on it as well, but I also thought it was a nice nice visual for the public. So the total revenues are in the top left-hand corner of your screen there, or on the paper you have. And I just also included where we were sitting with revenues in the previous quarter. And it might just show some ebbs and flows to council of how, with tax revenues coming in July versus the first quarter of the year, et cetera. Total expenditures, so we're up over 20 million now, but this of course has to do with capital projects getting underway, public operations with road construction, maintenance, grading, etc., versus the previous quarter. Our investments are still sitting at just over 17 million, so there's no change there from the previous quarter. And our total cash at the end of the quarter is just over 26 million. So this includes the 20 million in taxes we've collected to date, as well as some money that is sitting in our HISA account, so our high interest savings account, which is a little bit separate from the investments because it's not a locked in term. So I just included that for your information as well. And I believe I have it on another page here. I think there's around 10 million sitting in that HISA account. So our taxes were levied in May at just shy of 23 million, which of course includes all of the requisitions as well that were required to collect. And our total collections as of the date of this report was just over 20 million, 20,634,000, which is about 93% of our current year's collections. So that's quite healthy as of July 31st.
So just on that, was there any particular group that was short? Like is it linear that's making up the difference here, or?
Some of it is that. Both the provincial and federal grant in lieu's usually come in after the tax due date. Some of it is the linear properties, and then some of it is just outstanding regular taxes. So there were, I did wait, or generally wait, about a week after the tax due date to ensure we've received all the payments through the mail, because we will accept the postmark on the envelope. And now with online banking as well, sometimes there's a couple day delay in being a weekend on top of it. So that's where we were sitting even with all of that. So, we've always had pretty healthy collections, so it's good to see that trend hasn't declined much during the pandemic. So, and I didn't put it on here, but I did bring the business tax portion as well. So we levied just over 1.5 in the business tax portion, which is, the cattle, sheep, chickens, etc. And as of July 31st, we had 230,000 outstanding, which is still pretty good. I looked again today just out of curiosity, just at the business tax, and we're just around 80,000 not collected. So even those collections are fairly decent. I included for you as well our total accounts payable for the last quarter, so about 4.7 million. These accounts payable, bear in mind, like if you're looking at the expenditures, they're not matching up. So these are specific checks issued. They're not necessarily other things such as payroll, direct debits necessarily that come out, like the school requisition, things like that. This is strictly checks that we issue out for services, basically, for the most part. Accounts receivable, so these are our cash collections outside of taxes. So we're pretty steady, somewhere between that $1.52 million mark per quarter. I'll just go down kind of to the bottom right. So this is just sort of a circular graph, I guess, of our budgeted and year-to-date percentage of income and expenses. So it's just there for a visual. And then to the left of that is sort of a graph by department, so showing the budget. The dark colors here are the budgeted revenues, and the lighter blue is the budgeted expenses, and the green is sort of where we're at to date. So all things, you know, being equal, I guess, that green line would be straight across basically at the end of the day if we were met the exact target for tax support or required revenues expenses. So I just wanted to kind of present this quick snapshot for council as a nice visual as well for the public. I thought it was something that would be easy to put out. So I look forward to any feedback you might have on that as we move through the report. Just on page 2, I kind of did a consolidated summary for you. So again, as of this report, which was July 31st, there were some surplus and deficit projections adjustments made since the last report. The surplus is projected at about $559,000 right now, and this is due to varying factors. Although general operational expenditures are in line with the budget, we have realized some savings through the COVID pandemic, such as, you know, there hasn't been the PD opportunities or the travel opportunities as a small example. That's not the hugest portion, but there are definitely some savings being realized through the pandemic. There's always operational efficiencies, specifically in the public operations department, that we're working on, and additional revenues that have been realized, and I'll get into some details of those. So even though, as I mentioned, the COVID restrictions did lift over the summer, many training and conference opportunities attended by staff are still being held virtually. As well, council is still maintaining their 10% wage reduction, so that also adds to some of that surplus. And although tax collections are above the 90 percentile, the January 31st 15% penalty, which is a penalty on all outstanding taxes, so previous years and penalties combined, was significantly higher. Not significantly. We delayed a penalty last year as well, which reduced our penalty revenues, and then I think maybe some past payments weren't collected due to that, which then of course increased that 15%. But we seem to be kind of leveling that out. We still have a list of oil and gas companies that Les and I are working on to bring forward to council. We'll apply for the PERC program. I'm sorry, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically an opportunity to go to the province to collect the school portion of those outstanding taxes. But there will be some write-offs coming forward to council for those other ones if the other avenues just haven't produced any revenues. The planning department has seen a significant increase in development, which has exceeded their budget for the department already, as well as the estimated budgeted revenues for emergency response and fines. They're already 86% above the budgeted revenue, so our fire fines have been fairly significant. Fire fees, not fines. So just with all of the emergency calls that we've been on. Now, we haven't seen it yet because the new contract only became effective as of April 1st, but we'll see how the new contract and those costs where we're paying more of a fee for service per response unit, how that'll impact the budget there. So some of this increase may get eaten up by the difference if we see that in the next quarter or so before the end of the year. So that's something, as Larry mentioned, that Byron Fraser's working on with the departments to ensure that the level of service and response is what's required. We also had some increase in the long-term investments. We invested with Wood Gundy a couple years ago, and the return on those investments has been quite positive. We've been quite lucky there. Now, noting that I did include it here, we will transfer a portion of that into our capital reserves as per the policy and apply that interest back to our capital reserve balances. But I wanted to point that out to council where it stands right now. And of course, further updates as we move through the year will come to you, and hopefully we can get closer to actuals. Doug and I are working with the new financial software people, so in the next 9 to 12 months, we anticipate that software will be fully functioning. It's a bit of a process. So we are also in the beginning stages of budget planning. So I have sat down already with public operations and looked at their current budget and where we're moving forward with next year's budget. And they're pretty good. Everything's looking pretty tight this year, so that's good news on that front. So we'll have more with that. I was going to mention too that I'm hoping to have Wood Gundy actually either virtually or in person, I'm not sure what their policies are right now, attend the September 16th meeting and give an economic update to council. We thought that that might be beneficial, and they are the investment experts. We do have quite a bit of funds with them, and I know sometimes I get investment questions, and they're the experts in that. So they have offered to come and present to council and give a bit of an economic update, which I thought was timely for the time of year, as well as what we've all been through for the past 18 months. So just wanted to add that little note. If you move to page 3, this is just kind of a statement. That graph at the bottom of page 2, this is the graph sort of in number form, and you can see a bit more where that surplus mostly is coming from. So we have planning and development as well as emergency services. We have the interest and penalties earned under finance and administration, a little bit in assessment, and that's mostly due to the DIP cost change. And then council and CAO's office. Overall, the rest of the departments feeling pretty good about where they are right now. As mentioned, I sat down with public operations, so we're quite comfortable with their budgets right now. And of being July 31st, again, the activities are more or less just starting to steamroll. So this is the time of year, this next quarter, that we'll really be able to see where things went. Page 4 again, same information, just a bit of a different format. This is more sort of what you would see on the financial statements, and I've included it the last few financial reports for council. And then I just added a few more graphs, revenues to date on page 8, just by department, just so you can sort of see, again, the darker blue is the used portion and the lighter blue is the remaining portion of revenues. And page 9, same thing, only it's the expenditures portion. So you can see the darker blue being the used portion of expenses and the lighter blue being remaining. The rest of the document up until page 12, I believe, is just the activity summary for each of the departments. This was another question I had for council. Just, is this something you like to continue to see included in the financial reports, is the activities?
Yep.
Okay, good. I know it's really good information, and it kind of gives you an idea of when we're looking at numbers where the money's gone or coming from, but I just wasn't sure if it was too large of a report if you wanted it reduced. But if you're happy with that, I'll keep doing that. So I'll just leave that for your reading pleasure. Page 13 is just a grant summary for the 2021 grants that we've applied for by project. So you can see that most of the projects have been approved, with the exception of the STIP funding for the bridges. But in the budget, we will be allocating market access network funds to those, but we always apply for STIP, because if there's an opportunity to grant fund something, we will. So I think maybe, though, at the time of this report, I don't know if Amelia included the Mountain Meadows grant that was approved at the last meeting. So there'll be another $515,000 of grant funding used up there.
Just on a note on that, that $515,000 is going to come from the federal gas tax fund. I believe I misspoke when I said it was coming out of the MSI or reserve, public reserve. So federal gas tax was where that could actually be applied to.
Yeah, and I think Amelia just works within the numbers that we have, as well as the approvals, what each grant is willing to approve. That was a bit of a more complicated one, because it's an environmental and safety concern, more than Devin spoke with them too, or got more of the details, but he had to provide quite a bit of information to both MSI and FGTF before we could get approval, so that's moved forward. Page 14 is just a provincial announcement summary. I started doing at the last financial report for council, and it's just speaking to sort of where the grant fundings are at, what we've received, what we anticipate. I don't think there is any anything new here. I did add the PERC program at the bottom, so there that is. So you can at least see that portion. And it's a February 2022 deadline, but we'll have to have everything sorted out prior to that application going forward. And then the last page is just a summary of our investments, where they are. And, oh, I see one of my cells must have got messed up. And as you can see, that Wood Gundy has a large portion, and that is again why I've asked them to come forward. And I have read some of their economic updates that they've presented through the GFOA, and they're very, I'll say layman's terms, they're easily understood economic updates, which is nice because sometimes you hear those and it's just way over your head. So I spoke with Anne, and she thought it was a good idea to have them come forward. So that's just a quick summary and overview of the quarterly financial up to July 31st. So I don't know if council has any questions or comments.
I just have one question, and I gotta go find the page again. Sorry. Oh, it was page 7. And I wasn't sure what the orange dots meant, or,
Oh, so the orange is
is it
kind
kind
of
of a code?
neutral.
Oh.
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
kind of a neutral.
no, it's a good report, I like it, thanks. Yeah, Steve?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has the county received funding or payments from the PERC program in the past year or two?
We have not, no.
Okay.
This was, to my knowledge, the first time they've brought it forward, or the first we'd heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other question? Yep, go ahead, Jeremy.
I don't have necessarily questions, just comment. I think the dashboard, honestly, that Jen put together is great. It's a good visual picture with summarization of the kind of dollars that the county is essentially having to use to operate. So, just want to commend Jen.
Mm-hmm.
Looks really good.
Thank you.
Good job, yep.
Thank you.
Except for I don't like the heat necessarily right in the operation.
Well, that's where it's always going to be. So the recommendation, should council choose to, although it's not necessary, is to just to accept the report for information. And then Maddie has, with the last report and moving forward, we'll take this report and summarize it as a public document that way. We've been putting on the website as well.
Okay. So unless there's any more questions, we need a motion. Claus?
I'll move that we take Jen's report here as information.
Any more discussion? Call for the question, those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's go down to G4, I guess would be the next one. And that's revisions to policy 161, donations to community organizations, programs, and events.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Council.
Hi.
So yes, I am here to present revisions to Policy 161, donations to community organizations, programs, events, and activities. Policy 161 was adopted in 2013 and revised last in 2014. Its purpose is to establish guidelines for donations to community groups and events in Lethbridge County. Applicants are required to fill out the application form included within the policy, with donations over $200 to be approved by council. Approved requests are funded from the donations reserve up to $500. After a review of the policy, administration noted that it referred to the Land Trust Reserve Grant program, which was discontinued in 2018 and replaced with a community grant program, which was similar in that it provided grant funding to community organizations. The community grant program was then discontinued in 2020, and instead annual donations are made to the 7 county community organizations that operate community halls within our municipal boundaries. The current policy 161 does not, oh, sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. There were 7 community projects. Didn't we add an 8th one, the Prairie Tractor?
Yes, Councillor Van Der Veen through the chair. Sorry, I missed that one. Yes, Coyote Flats is included in that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the current policy 161 does not allow for capital facilities and equipment to receive funding and directs applicants seeking donations for capital projects to apply under the Land Trust Reserve Program, which, as you know, is no longer applicable. So this paragraph, which is highlighted in the attached policy in the agenda, should be removed. Also, the current policy also states that an annual budget allotment is made to establish the amount of cash or goods and services in kind that the county can donate. But as of 2021, annual funding is no longer allocated in the budget to the donations reserve, and reference to this funding should be removed, which is also highlighted in the attached revised policy. So the recommendation is that the revised policy 161, donations to community organizations, programs, events, and activities be adopted as presented.
Any questions or concerns? So it's not a concern as to this amount, but underneath the purpose, it says to provide the authority to the Chief Administrative Officer, the CAO, regarding requests for donations of up to a value of $200. I have absolutely no problem with that. It's just, how do we account for that? Like, the public doesn't know if the CAO gives out $50 to somebody. So maybe on our website, we could list the grants that we give, grant dollars we give out, like, you know, to the different community organizations and the Prairie Engine and the rest of them.
Mr. Chairman, we actually, yesterday I just added on our website a webpage with all the community association,
Okay.
the $10,000 yearly.
Yeah.
But we don't have any other donations on there, so if that's something council would like, I can put that on there
Jen?
for sure.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna add, Mr. Chairman, that I do in the financial report list the other donations that council provides, but anything under the 200, you're right, we don't usually identify, but I can look into those, and if we have any, I can also add them, and that can go to the quarterly report as well.
Well, just so we can present it to the public, that's all that's all I care about. Because I think it's exactly the way it's been done. It doesn't need to come to council, but it needs to have some kind of accounting for it.
Yep, I can for sure do that.
Okay.
Yep.
Anybody else got any? Need a motion again. Boy, everybody's very quiet today, Clones. Might as well go ahead.
Yeah. I'll move that the revised policy 161, donations, community organizations, programs, events, and activities be adopted as presented.
Any discussion? Call for the question. Those in favor, opposed, carried.
Thank you, council.
Thank you. Okay. It's like pulling chicken teeth. And the next, have I missed anything in our little break session there? Candace, have we got everything else?
We just missed the finance. We have the attendance and then
Yep.
the camera session.
Yep, okay, so let's do the council attendance updates. Oops. So on July the 2nd, we had a special meeting for county council. Also the same day, mayors and reeves. Oh, that's an error. Don't have that meeting in July or August. July the 7th, meeting with the CAO. The 8th, the Lethbridge County Council meeting. The 14th, met with the CAO. 16th was the CAO evaluation meeting. The 20th was the AUMA President's Summer Tour. That was quite interesting, actually, although not very well attended by other urban municipalities. The 21st, the meeting with the CAO, and the 21st, the Minister Madhu Rural Crime Town Hall in Claresholm. And I should say that was very disappointing. I think they are really convinced that that's the only way to go, is to switch over to their own provincial police force, and they can provide more people on the ground and better service, for less cost, and they can't account for how they can do that. So that's quite interesting. Tori?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yep, sorry.
Just on the meeting with CEO, can you elaborate a little bit on what kind of things you guys cover? Or?
Sure. We just talk about what issues Ann's facing, and if there's anything from council, and I don't get too many phone calls about anything from the rest of council, but we talk about what should be maybe on the future meetings coming up and things like that.
July 2nd, special Lethbridge County Council meeting, the 8th, Lethbridge County Council meeting, and the 16th, the CAO evaluation meeting.
And Bob is not here, but he had on the 2nd special Lethbridge County Council meeting, the 8th, the Lethbridge County Council meeting, and the 16th, the CAO evaluation. And Ken's not here either. He had the 2nd special Lethbridge County Council meeting, the 8th was Lethbridge County Council, 16th was CAO evaluation meeting, and the 20th, he came with me to the AUMA President's Tour. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. July 2nd, special Lethbridge County Council meeting, 7th, Exhibition Park Board meeting, July 8th, County Council meeting, and the 16th, CAO evaluation meeting.
Klaus?
July 2nd, the special county council meeting. July 8th, Lethbridge County Council meeting. July 16th, CEO evaluation meeting. And the 30th, we had a virtual SAWA meeting.
Morris?
July 2nd, special Lethbridge County Council meeting. July 8th, Lethbridge County Council meeting, where I was not there because I had been a funeral. Should have mentioned that, I guess. And July 16th, CEO evaluation meeting.
Okay. Do we need a motion for those? No. Okay, Morris. All in favor? All opposed? Carried. Now we need a motion to go into closed session.